Hello and welcome to our CATS presentation. Today we are going to look at some of the reasons why our older students struggle with handwriting, and that can be for a variety of reasons. My name is Claire Warner and joining me for the presentation is Noorjahan. I'd like to introduce Noorjahan, and she is going to talk through her role in CATS and also some of her previous roles before she joined us. My name's Claire Warner. I am one of the Deputy Heads of Service. I'm one of the 20 UK ambassadors for PDNet, and I have also written over the years many fine and gross motor programmes, many focusing on handwriting and fine motor skills. I do have a particular interest in dyspraxia and dystrophy. Over this 1 hour session today we're going to look at the challenges some of our older students face. And by older students I really mean anybody really that's joined at secondary school age, sort of year 7, going right up to college age. We're going to look at how you can help at home as families and what is really reasonable to request from school. We know all schools are different and all offers are different, but we probably have a core request that we could make to school. And then finally we're going to look up how we can use IT to support our students' fine motor skills and recording skills at this age. So first of all, I'd like to look at the facts. Basically, the older the student, the harder it is to catch up with handwriting difficulties. If a student has no other needs, no other special needs, whether that be autism or language difficulties, or maybe even things like dyslexia, if a student doesn't have any of those and it's just purely a physical issue, most students will have caught up by the time they leave primary. And generally, we see the boys and young men affected by motor challenges linked to handwriting much more than we do girls. We do occasionally see girls, but it is much more unusual for us. And it's also important to remember that bad habits are actually really tricky to change. That's the same for us as adults, and that really applies for students by the time they get into their teenage years. So this is the picture that we're looking at, and today we're going to look at some reasons about what we can do, and initially how we can unpick what's going on. Quite often when we see students for handwriting referrals, what we see is an immediate response, particularly from families that say, well actually it's okay, you don't need to write. We actually can use computers now for everything, and actually my child's old enough to use a computer, just let them use a computer. And to some extent I agree with that. We are going to look at IT at the end. But I think it's really important to remember how much handwriting actually goes on in most UK classrooms. And generally in some lessons we can see as much as 50% of their time is either used in copying from the board or writing or jotting down notes or free writing. So actually that's a huge part of their school day. We're going to look at how we can use IT, but I think it's also important to start off by understanding just how much writing a young person is asked to do during their school day at a secondary school. So the aim is what we can do to help, and in terms of how we work at CAT, we always try and look at how we can help in terms of linking school and families together, because when we all work together, generally our young person has a much better support network and a much more consistent offer of help. When describing what we do at CATS, I often describe our staff as detectives. Normally we are only really called in when most of the school systems and techniques and interventions aren't really working. So it's our job to go in and unpick what's going on. So if we see a student at secondary school and they still have a handwriting challenge, these are some of the questions that we will be asking. So if you're trying to understand what's going on for your child at home, then we thought it was useful if we went through some of the things that we would be asking when we went to visit them. So we've been looking at basically what fine and gross motor skills were in place when they were around the age of 4 or 5, just as they began to start formal education. And that we always talk about gross motor skills quite often before we talk about what they're doing with their hands. And people often say, oh, well, they're really good at football, or they're, they're really good at riding a bike, etc. And it's also, we go in and ask those questions about how do they sit? Are they leaning across the table? Are they low toned? Do they struggle to sit on something like a breakfast bar chair? And I think it's useful for us to know, we're sort of trying to unpick how strong particular key areas are, particularly their core and their shoulder and their hip girdle strength really as well. So you can be quite sporty in some particular areas, but you can still struggle with sitting and having that core and shoulder strength. So that's where we would start. And it is particularly common at the moment for us to see young boys who sometimes have low tone. And if you have low tone, then sometimes actually running around and moving is actually quite hard work. And that becomes a bit of a vicious cycle, and you can end up, for some of our students, becoming overweight as well. So it's about unpicking what goes on, how active are they, physically active outside school. And then we have to look at, actually, do our students know how to write every letter from memory? And you'd be thinking, well, our students are in secondary school, of course they do. But if you just look at some of the writing that's on the screen, what you see is our students mixing up lower and uppercase letters. And even at that basic level, if you're going to mix upper and lowercase letters, then what you find is a writing style that's going to become very, very muddled and actually certainly not fluent. So one of the things is we ask students to write lowercase and uppercase alphabet at speed with their eyes closed. And can we see, have they got an internal memory? And actually sometimes when people watch us do this sort of assessment, you can see them looking at us thinking they're secondary school students, but actually this is a really common issue. And actually sometimes if we can go back and look at how the individual letters are formed, it actually can speed up fluency. Also, it's whether or not students are making reversals in particular letters. Again, if this is the case, it's nothing to worry about, and it is actually something really simple. There's a really simple ways to correct. So again, don't panic if you see that in your child's writing, and we'll talk through how we can correct that near the end. We also look at whether students are visually seeing their writing and what's on the board correctly. So are our students always starting by the margin? Are they always able to put spaces in automatically? And can they copy from the board? And quite often people will say, I've taken my student or taken my child for an eye test and their eyes are fine. And actually that's great. You should always do that and have that as an early stage check. You should always have your students' eyes tested, particularly when they're at secondary school. But there's a whole set of visual perceptual skills that are nothing to do with your eyesight. It's really how your brain sees images and the space around the images. So again, if you see students who are not able to keep letters on the line, not starting by the margin, we often see students who start at the beginning by the margin and then end up getting further and further across the page as they write. Again, if you see that, that sort of support would be around visual perceptual skills, and that's something that we can help you with. In the UK, there is no definitive way of how to write or how to develop handwriting, and we have certain schemes, and sometimes certain local authorities or certain groups of schools will join and follow a certain scheme. But there is no UK directive, and that's why we see students across the UK with wide-ranging letter formation style. If you look at countries such as Spain and Germany and France, they have a national way of writing, therefore it is fairly easy to see from somebody's handwriting their country of origin. So that makes things quite tricky, particularly for students who move between schools or who moved around quite a bit. And it also makes things quite difficult for parents, because you think, well, I learnt this way, my child's learning that way, and you could have a child that's 2 years younger who's learning a different way. And I think there's sort of two schools of thought. There's a school of thought that feels that if you join letters, then actually that helps with the fluency and handwriting. And actually, to some extent, if you don't have lots of other challenges going on, then I probably would agree with that. If you join, then it does speed up your handwriting. However, if you have a student who has other SEN needs to do with literacy or language or social communication, then actually by adding the joins sometimes actually slows students down, because it's one more thing to think about. And sometimes when we see students who are older who are really having to still think about where to join and how to join, we will often take them back to actually just printing and spacing out letters. As you can see, I've put on the side the average words per minute. So there's a really simple handwriting assessment called DASH. Several of us use that. Senkos would be able to use that in your school. And you'd be looking about how many words per minute your child can write. And it's not as simple as just writing and adding them up and counting per minute. There's 4 or 5 stages to the assessment, but the average words per minute and the ages are on your screen. So it may be an idea to sort of just do a simple test with the quick brown fox and ask students to copy it and see how fast they can write, and the writing needs to be legible. And then the other thing is to ask them to think of a sentence, so they are composing a sentence. You know, it could just be my favourite meal is, and see what their handwriting speed is then. Because then you can begin to unpick, is it a mechanical, physical challenge, or is some of your child's issues linked to the composition and the language of, and maybe the spelling of the writing, as well as the handwriting. And that really begins to give us an idea whether it's just a physical problem, or there's a wider cognitive challenge for your child. So it's really useful to know, even if your child's in year 7, is your child's writing automatic? Have they got there? Because every class teacher within a secondary school would be expecting that to be the case. So you may want to try this at home. Just simply write out clearly the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, and you ask your child to write this as quickly as they can for 2 minutes, and copy from you as quickly as you can for 2 minutes. And some of the things that when we're asking students to do an assessment, we're looking for are, do they sit well? Do they lean? Do they moan they're tired? Do they place their non-handwriting hand on the table to stabilise the paper or the book? Do they swap over their hands? Do they hold a pen so that you can see the tip, as you can see? Can they write fluently? Do they grip very, very hard, or do they press hard when they're writing? And at the end, do they complain their hand or their wrist hurts after writing for maybe sort of 5 to 10 minutes? So these are the things that we'd be looking for, and these are the things that we would be concerned if we saw. So if we saw a student who was really struggling to maintain a good sitting position when they were writing, they was leaning on the table, or they were leaning propping up against the table, particularly if they're pressing hard, or just really complaining of either pain or fatigue. Interestingly, what we wouldn't do is do anything with a pen and paper or anything really with their hand. We would immediately be looking at bigger exercises that are gross motor type exercise to improve core strength, shoulder and sitting position. And at the end of our session, you're going to be given a free pack with some links, and you can download many packs for ideas to do these sort of exercises at home. So some of you may be surprised to find that the exercises for handwriting don't involve a pen, a paper, a chair or a table at this stage. What we need your child to do is be active, get moving, and I appreciate that may come with quite a bit of moans and groans. But if you give the alternative that there's extra handwriting practice as the other alternative, then they are probably likely to choose moving around. Some of the really good things that you can do at home are, if you've got any capacity to either have a basketball hoop in your garden or find one at a local park, these are amazing because they're sort of a one-size-fits-all. you're using upper body, core, shoulder, and you're involving, needing to have your hands above your head. In what you may find, if you take your child to a park and play basketball with them, they will often moan that their arms or their shoulder aches, but it's actually that shoulder strength that you're trying to build. You can see the whiz balls that are on the screen. If you have, if your child has another sibling to play, or you can do this with them, basically you open them wide and shoot the ball to the other person. I think it can get quite violent in some families, but they're good fun, and currently in the pound shop they're £1 during the summer. I appreciate washing the car is probably not going to be very popular with most teenagers, but if you're giving children chores in the home, then something like washing a car is perfect because it involves reaching and stretching and bending. Many of our local parks now have outdoor gyms, so this is a free way, and it's a probably age-appropriate way to do some active exercise. Some local gyms that are paid gyms actually do a teenager program, and I think you get 1 or 2 free PT sessions, and they will develop a program. I know going to the gym is particularly popular at the moment with young people, so if your child is saying, I really don't want to study, I need to go to the gym, an hour in the gym is actually very beneficial towards these handwriting challenges, and actually it's very good for your mental health. I've also added things like Pilates and yoga. Again, this may not be for everybody, but there are a lot of free programs on YouTube that your child could do quietly in their space of their home, and actually they are amazing for developing core and shoulder strength. So as I said, we're going to provide free exercise packs for you all at the end of the session. The reality of 2022 is that most students game. We often ask students what you do, and they will always talk about Xbox or PSP, and that's really more or less universal. I think as a parents, the information we'd like to share with you is it's really the length of the time that our students are gaming without a break and not moving around, and also the position that they're sat in while they're gaming. Quite often they're up against their bed, they're laying on their bed, they're on a beanbag, and all those positions causes actually sort of a curvature of the spine and actually reduces strength, particularly within an upright sitting position. And we're not going to begin to recommend teenagers play games in an upright chair, because that's probably never going to happen, but we would be recommending breaks. So for every 45 minutes on a game that they get up and move around and have a break. The Red Bull company actually have got some really good hand exercises for gamers, because we see more and more students have problems with their hands in what we call inward rotation. So they actually are used to going inwards to operate the controller, as you can see on the screen. And we actually have in children as young as 12 with repetitive strain injuries now. And again, none of that is conducive to sort of efficient handwriting style. Also, as you can see on the right hand side of your screen, we've got a balance ball pack. And balance balls can be picked up generally as cheaply as about £5 from Argos. And they're a great alternative to a more formal chair. Well worth getting. I think it's important to remember as a parent, if you do buy your child one of these, they're actually very, very hard work to sit on, and that's the whole point, is that you constantly have to correct your posture. So if you give your students one of these, you still need the chair, particularly in the early days while they're developing their core and their sort of girdle strength. But again, many students quite like the novelty of it, and it's a great workout for them. We do see students that generally have quite weak hands. They're students that struggle to take the top off a water bottle, they can't open a can of Coke, and actually just struggle with strength in their hands generally. And that can be particularly apparent if you're hypermobile or you have conditions like Ehlers-Danlos. There's some really good simple things that you can do. You can buy a range of things that exercise and stretch your hands, but sometimes an elastic band does just a good enough job. or Theraputty you can buy from Amazon. I think currently it's about £4 or £5, and you can get different strengths. So again, most teenagers are known for irritating families by fiddling, picking up things, flicking it, twisting it and fiddling. And actually, just for once, that's exactly what you want your students to do. And again, in your handout pack, we're going to give you a link to resources and activities that you can do at home. So when joining today's session, we asked everybody to get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do a timed activity for 1 minute. So I'm going to, when I say go, what we'd like you to do is pick up your pencil or pen and scribble across the whole surface of the piece of paper that you've got. The one thing that you can't do is you can't stop until we say stop, which is going to be after 60 seconds. Okay, go. This may appear to be a really obvious slide, and some of you as parents are thinking, well, why on earth is this lady showing us pens? I think the reality is most teenagers lose things. Most teenagers lose a lot and are fairly disorganised. And when we often go and see students who have a handwriting assessment, sometimes they don't have a pen and they're borrowing a pen from somebody. Sometimes they've got the scratchiest biro. And I'm sure, you know, when I speak to the parents sometimes with a meeting after the assessment, they'll say, but, you know, we started the term, I went to WH Smith's, we stocked them up. And I think the reality is they've been lost or they've been gone. So I think it's probably worth giving them a toolkit of some good pens, buying a pencil case that you keep at home that they can come and replenish their stock from. And actually writing with a fine liner or roller tip pen actually can make a huge difference. And some of the pilot type ones often have like a rubbery base near the end, and that's a great age appropriate alternative to a pencil grip. And actually, if you put a group of pens on the table, most people will gravitate to those anyway, just because they're really comfortable. I've put a selection on the screen, and in your handout it's got links to where to get them from, but most can be bought from local stationers or Amazon. These are the ones that I commonly find most young people prefer to write with, and I do myself. So, understanding that there's a challenge, we understand that actually it's quite tricky to correct if you've got some bad habits or you're still struggling by the time you're a teenager. And we sort of understand that what we can do, that actually the physical, gross motor and fine motor can make a difference. So we understand that, and we understand the difficulty that fatigue can play for some of our students as well. But the bottom line is, to be at secondary school and to be at secondary school well, what you need is these two minimum handwriting requirements. You need to be able to, as a student, take notes that can be read by you. It doesn't really matter if other people can read them, it's can you read them back and can you make sense of those. So these are the quick notes that you make during sort of feedback from a test, or while a teacher's talking, and that's fine really for those to be messy. I know sometimes people get irritated by that, but actually if you're going to save your energy for the greater writing task, then I think that's probably okay. But you do need to have the ability to produce more formal written work, and that's sort of your assignments, your essays, things that are going to be handed in and things that are going to be graded. And they are the two basics that you need really as a secondary school student. And what we're going to do now is look at some of the things we can do is if your young person currently does not have these two things in place. So whilst we can work on the fine motor, gross motor, and even if visual perception's a challenge, we can work on those individually and have those going on in the background for our young people. But the reality is, we know they're going into class, sometimes 6 classes a day, with up to 50% writing content. So I would be recommending that if they don't have those two core skills in place, that you do consider IT moving forward. So first, the really quick fixes. Some of us as adults, particularly those of us who are a bit older, may struggle with using these things automatically, because most of us probably are here on the call because we can write or we can type at a decent speed. But young people take to these sort of tricks, and definitely make sure as parents that you're aware that they're out there. So it may look that they're not writing or they're not typing, but actually sometimes there's much more efficient ways of doing it now. So the 4 that I think all students should know is, as you go to Google anything, you may not have noticed, but on the end of the search bar is a little microphone. You literally click there and you can say, you know, Siri, how many wives did Henry VIII have? You can use Siri on an iPhone or an iPad in exactly the same way. So again, it may look like, you know, your students on the phone or they're not working in the traditional way, but actually if they're researching a project or trying to get their homework done, then actually you can use dictation very easily to find out and find your research material much quicker. Now, when you're looking at Word, and most schools will still use Word or form of Word, and if you're in a Google school, there's a Google form. There's an option to dictate in both Word, the current version of Word now, and Google as well, Google Docs. So your student can be at home in a quietish room ideally, and they can speak. Now, it's not perfect, but it's very, very good compared to it was maybe even 2 years ago. And then when they go back, they need to reread their work, and then they can just edit the grammar and make the odd, you know, maybe tweak that the dictation hadn't got right. Certainly without too strong an accent, the sort of accuracy now is about 95%, which is very, very good for where it's come from. So again, if your young person's got a long essay to write, then they can just talk and get it down on paper. They can go back and add extra paragraphs in, or, you know, cut and paste and change the order. And this makes writing a long piece of work much easier, and then it can be emailed and handed in. For those of you who've got students who also have profiles that link to literacy difficulties, whether that be spelling or comprehension or just reading speed generally, there's something called Immersive Reader, and Immersive Reader is built into Microsoft. So that's the same whether you are looking at Word or PowerPoint. You can take any text, so you can take a whole paragraph from the internet on anything that you're looking at and click and drop it into this profile, and then you can have it the background change. So particularly if your student likes a particular colour overlay, as you can see, you can change this font, you can make bigger spaces, and you can have it read to you. And so whilst this isn't about handwriting, we do see many of our students who have a spelling and language challenge also have handwriting needs. So it's about reducing the demand on them during the time they are studying. So Immersive Reader is free, and it's built into all Microsoft products now. And again, how to use it and the information on Immersive Reader is going to be in your handout pack. Also at CATS we do parent sessions on how to use this free tool, and it's crazy because it's free and it will be on your laptops at home and, you know, devices at school as well. It's just knowing where to find it and how to switch it in. Keyboarding skills is something that often schools will focus on with students who have poor handwriting skills, and that's fine, that's very relevant, and I would agree with that. I think historically, particularly students who are maybe year 8 or 9 upwards, they may have been put on programs such as Dance Mat, or, you know, a range of typing programs such as CAS, and they're okay. They're just okay as far as I'm concerned. If you've got a young child who wants to learn to type, I think probably your window of opportunity is probably up to about 9. After that, I think most students find them quite boring, and the dropout rate is quite high. In my experience, for all students that I've ever worked with, sometimes we do keyboarding programs and online games, but the reality is the quickest way to learn to keyboard is to have a reason. So I would set up an email account if they don't have one, and get friends and families to email them simple emails. How are you doing? What's going on? What's your favourite music? And it's a bit like most teenagers master the phone really quickly. If you've got a purpose, then actually you learn to keyboard much quicker really. If you actually do want the more formal typing programs that are free, again we've put the link in our handout pack. For those of you seriously considering IT and IT at school, some schools have a real challenge whether they can let you take a laptop in to school because they will have a school network. I think there's different reasons. So you can just ask the school to have access, your child to have access to a device that doesn't have to be on their whole school network, because what you're just asking your child to have is the same access to writing in the class. And for that, you just need a word processing tool. Some schools are amazing and will help you have access to Google Docs and all your documents while you're in school. But I think if you come across that challenge, just having access to a word processing tool in the classroom puts your young person back onto a level playing field with their peers. And if you're thinking of buying something new or something that can be taken to school, I would strongly consider or recommend buying a Chromebook. Now, a Chromebook looks the same as a small laptop to everybody else. It's lightweight. The reason I recommend a Chromebook is they're probably not quite so complicated and don't have quite so many things that can go wrong. They don't have quite so many areas that you can get in trouble in, particularly if you've got a student who struggles with attention and might be tempted to go somewhere they shouldn't during a class. I think the other thing to bear in mind is generally they have 8 to 9 hours battery, and quite often one of the reasons the school will say you can't take a laptop into school is because there's nowhere to plug it in and charge it. So a Chromebook wouldn't need that during the school day. Roughly at the moment, I've looked when I prepared the presentation, they're coming out about £150, £170. And whilst that's still a lot of money, it does provide a tool if your school are not able to provide that for you. There's quite unusual ways of working a Chromebook, and again we will be doing some parent sessions for you. But what comes in Chromebook, as you go onto a web page, the same as you would on any laptop or PC, in the corner you've got 3 little dots, and they're called extensions. And the extensions come with literally hundreds of free pieces of software that will check your spelling, check your grammar, let you type while you speak. And these are all free. And I think if you've got a student who's struggling with handwriting, spelling, organisation, then a Chromebook is well worth learning about, or getting them to come on one of our courses to learn how to use one. And generally most schools find if a student brings a Chromebook in, you can be fairly self-sufficient in class. And again, that makes a significant difference to a young person's independence, particularly if their level of need means that they are very unlikely to have TA support in a classroom. So over the years, I've attended many meetings with families and schools, and sometimes they've got quite heated because parents are saying, but my child can't write down, they're disadvantaged, they're really bright verbally, how are they going to pass their exams, etc. And sometimes we find ourselves in meetings talking about a scribe, or could they have a scribe? Now, in my world and my role, I work with children who have very severe physical disability, which means they can't write, they can't hold a pen. And I have students who have a very significant visual impairment. And sometimes we use a scribe to support those students. But the reality of using a scribe is, number one, you can't suddenly use that in a test. It's quite a skill to learn how to dictate, when to pause, and sort of organise what you want to say before you say it, because you can't just speak and then ask the scribe to edit. So it's quite a skill to learn. I think the other thing to bear in mind is, as your child moves through college or university, wherever they go, actually the access to a scribe, unless you have a really significant disability, will not be available. So my advice is that if we can possibly find a way for your child to be independent, then that's a better route. And certainly at the moment, IT is providing that independence for most of our students. And as your young person moves forward to GCSEs, or even sort of from year 9 onwards, you will have a lot of tests and, formalised assessment. I've been also making sure that as a family and your young person knows what's out there. So there are a range of apps that are just amazing. So we've got Chegg on here. We've also got a range of revision apps, so you can make your own flashcard cards, so they can flip and they can check, which is fine, and that's great. You can do it on a phone, and you don't have to write the facts out over and over again. I think I've put 2 or 3 links in our handout pack. The ones that I've linked also have a massive library, and in the UK we tend to teach the same curriculum over and over again. So you'll be able to go Google something like photosynthesis or, the Tudors, and somebody's probably done the work for you already. So that's a really easy tool. Sometimes we find our young people don't really know how to revise, so they just write the facts out over and over again. And actually, if we have a handwriting challenge, that's incredibly laborious, and again, unlikely to be stuck to for any length of time. So definitely check out the apps we've put on our pack. YouTube has just become amazing. I mean, it was quite good before lockdown, but you've got, if you're Googling, year 9 English text, you've got all the lessons online again. You've got teachers doing revision, you've got students doing revision, and there's maths examples that talk through, there's science things talk through. And I think sometimes people forget about YouTube as you get higher up through school, and people have put a lot of time and energy into different YouTube videos and are well worth a look. And again, you can revise by watching those, and again, you don't have to write those out. I would always teach every young person I work with how to mind map and how to graphic notate. We do regular 1-hour sessions at CATS in the evenings around the time of exams, teaching people how to do that. So again, look out for those, because they're always quite popular. And then the other, probably more recent thing, is podcasts. So again, if you search on podcasts, and I've put the link in our pack, we have a range of podcasts now that are revision podcasts for GCSE and A-level. And again, a great way of not having to write and not actually look at a screen, but to listen to content and just hear somebody else teach you facts or an explanation around a subject. Noorjahan and I are both parents of young people now. They've both gone through the school system. Noorjahan and I have a couple of children that are going through uni, and a couple of children that have gone out the other side. And I think my advice really to you is just choose the hill that you die on. I think it's about acknowledging for some of our young people, the handwriting challenge is a real challenge. It's not them being lazy, it's not them choosing to be difficult, and actually it makes their life very, very difficult. So I think it's about choosing the battles you have and making sure as a parent you're as informed as you can be about what's available and what are the alternatives to write and to study. It doesn't all have to be about pen and paper. I think this is a fairly common scenario. Suddenly, your child comes to you at 10 o'clock and they say, in tears or very angry, I've got this, it's got to be in tomorrow, and it's 10 o'clock at night. You may have other siblings in the house, you may need to go to bed yourself. If you need a really short fix, I would find out what the title is and then just help them organise their thoughts. So get them to tell you, this is just an example, the key facts, what's going on, etc. And then you maybe scribe for them if it's 10 o'clock at night and it's all a bit of a crisis, but then you leave them an organised format in which to write something up. It's probably not going to be as good if they'd started it the day before, but it may stop that emotional meltdown or anxiety about going to school the next day. And again, we teach mind mapping, but we also taught something called graphic notation. And graphic notation is about putting images as well as words to help you remember and make links to words. We haven't got time to do that today, but again, it's sort of sessions that we do fairly regularly throughout the year. So come and join us and we'll teach you how to graphic notate. Sometimes here at SEATS we have phone calls from families who are unhappy about a response they've received from schools. I think if I'm being fair to schools, is sometimes they're unsure about actually what they can do. Many of our students who've got a handwriting challenge don't fall within the very high level of needs of support, and therefore they don't always have access to a TA. Don't even often have access to a Senko's time as such. It's a very specific need. And even if they are under a Senko level of support, sometimes schools still don't really know what to do. I think sometimes even at secondary, parents want their child or young person to be taken out and be doing a handwriting intervention that looks like an intervention, whether that be writing, something that means 15 minutes a day, etc., because that's maybe what they've had at primary. I think, number one, if they'd had that at primary and it didn't work, it is unlikely to work unless somebody's incredibly focused and dedicated at secondary. I think also the research currently shows, which is our experience as well, that even if they come out for that intervention during the school day, once they go back into class, it has very little impact because they go back to maybe not sitting correctly or back to those bad habits. So again, I think it's about having the wider gross motor physical activity going on in the background and maybe using IT as sort of an insurance plan just in case at the time of what's going on in class at that very moment. I think it's about looking at asking if schools have access to laptops or tablets your child can use, and if they don't, whether or not you can or in the position to provide it. I think those of you who are not in a financial position to provide it, you can look at things like Family Trust, and there's a range of charities who will provide equipment if you're on a low budget. I think sometimes schools will sometimes still say no, and that's often because they're not really sure about the insurance position and liability of a child bringing a laptop in and out of school. And again, we've got lots of those performers set up, and we've got lots of that happening across our schools in Redbridge. So again, if you want support with how to have that conversation or examples of performers, or you'd even like to come on the Chromebook training, let us know and we can help you. So hopefully over the course of this session, what you've learned is that it is actually still quite tricky to learn things that you've not learned by the time you've got to secondary school, especially in terms of handwriting. Movement and gross motor activity will always help posture, core, and that will always help stamina. So whether you're a young person who's gaming for 5 hours without a break, or being really grumpy because they don't want to come for a walk in the park, that battle is well worth trying to fight because it will help them in the long run. It will also teach them life skills that will have movement in their life. We often see young people who have these sort of challenges as they're a teenager, and they go on to provide and be challenges throughout adult life. I think there's other ways to be constructive to help hand strength and dexterity. And again, we've put loads of links about what are sort of teenage friendly things for them to do, that they won't see it as therapy or doing anything particularly special. Be aware of things like gaming, and especially the posture when they are gaming. It does have a detrimental effect, and the studies that are coming out, particularly after 2 years of lockdown, there's quite a lot of research around the top of your spine and your shoulders. So it's well worth making sure that you're aware of how long your child games for, but also the position that they're sat in. Do buy good pens and tools, and buy spares, and probably buy even more spares if you've got the possibility of doing so. If financially things are tight, then maybe just give them one at a time, because teenagers do lose things. But it does make a difference if you've got a decent pen to write with. Most of the ones that I've put links to, particularly the packs, I think you can probably get 12 pens for about £12, about £1 a pen. But your child will write much better with a pen like that than they will with a scratchy pencil. Also, we need to know that your child can take notes in a lesson, and that if they really try, they can produce a written piece of work. I think it's different if it's going to take them longer and they can still do it. That is definitely worth persevering with. But if they can't do those two things, then really I think your options at the moment are IT. Make sure you're aware of apps and all the things that are online that are free. There is so much out there that's free and really good quality now, and it doesn't require your child to be writing endless notes. IT skills generally are an amazing life skill to have, and we see many of our students who have handwriting challenges go on to have amazing IT skills, and many of them actually go on and use this as a career. Please avoid relying on a scribe unless you've got a really specific physical or sensory need, because it's not a lifelong strategy for you, and even by the time you get to college, quite often the staffing ratios means that will be a non-existent offer for your young person. So it's much better to look at other alternatives at this stage. And lastly, if you're still with us, we have a free handout. And what we've done is taken all the links that we've talked about, and we've put it together in one handy pack for you. And that takes you through to our free resource website, where you will be able to download the information and access the updated information as we change it. And that's particularly relevant for things like the apps and the IT. We change that information all the time. So hopefully you'll find the handout useful, and it may be something that you can even take into your school if you're having a conversation about what you saw today. Just in case you don't know us, we've got a YouTube channel, and if you just Google Redbridge SEAT, you'll find over 70 different videos about everything from being deaf to handwriting to ADHD to autism. So again, you may find that a useful resource. And then on the right hand side you'll see our resource website, and this is where some of the links in the handout will take you. This is an enormous website of free information, so again, feel free to access that. It's all free for families. Lastly, thank you for joining us. Noorjahan and I are going to stay in the room for another 10 minutes, so if anybody has any specific questions you'd like to ask, then please put up your camera and ask your question, or if you're feeling a little bit shy, just drop it in the chat and then one of us will read out the question for you. Thank you for joining us today, and I wish you and your young people well.